He did. Okay, well, Turretinfan, in John 6, specifically John 6, verse 56 and 58, 54, I want to say a number of other passages. The one thing that really jumps out at me, and the reason I say it is because before I embraced the Catholic faith, it was a real shock to me to read this language. So I know you're on the other side. You're Protestant. I'd say a very able debater as well. So I would like to ask you your thoughts on the usage of the word, the Greek word trogon, that Christ is using here, when he says, "Whoever eats my flesh," he repeats it, I believe, I want to say 4 times, verse 54, 56, 58. For the life of me, I can't find the other one, but my question to you is this. Why would Christ be using such literal language if he wasn't speaking of them literally having to chew, to masticate his actual body?
There's a number of possible explanations for that. I mean, one possible explanation is that we're reading too much connotation into the term, and that it's not nearly as necessarily graphic as some people like to claim. But perhaps another option is that the motivation for using a very graphic term to describe it is to emphasize the very graphic nature of the audacious claim that people need to eat his flesh and his blood. In other words, it's supposed to be shocking. Even without such a graphic term, it would be shocking, and just adding the graphic term makes it more shocking. And this was so that's part of it to make it sound more shocking, and partly to drive off people who didn't have a right understanding. We see one reason to think that was the reason to drive them off is that Jesus, the result of Jesus' words was to offend them, and then Jesus' explanation provided was provided only to the disciples.
Great. Thank you for that answer. My next question to you would be, keeping in line with the same surrounding terminology. Turretinfan, the word that Christ is using before he moves on to trogon, to trovo, he's using the Greek word phago, which I believe you and I are quite well aware that this is a kind of like, I guess, a generic Greek word for eating. Turretinfan, my question for you is, why would Christ go from using terminology that could be interpreted in a kind of, figurative, symbolic sense, to then using a Greek term that means to masticate, to literally chew upon something? Why the interchange of terms? Why the change of terms?
Again, your question does call for me to speculate about what's inside the mind of God, but having said that, the idea of using a variety of different words having the same or similar meaning, and of course, any word can be used in a metaphor. It's the fact that some word is rarely used in metaphors is a reflection of usage, not a reflection of meaning or possible usage. It's only a reflection of other usages. But in any event, it is possible that the idea is to ramp up the graphic nature of this metaphor. Rather, so for example, sometimes Jesus says that people need to follow him. Sometimes he even goes so far as to say they need to take up their cross and follow him. And that taking up the cross is a more graphic, more offensive example. And some people might take that literally to mean that we should be walking around carrying large crosses. That's not exactly what Jesus meant.
Turretinfan, are you aware of the word for gnaw, for chew, the Greek word trogon? Are you aware of that word ever being used in a metaphorical manner? Not just biblical, but basically throughout the history of the church. How about the history of the usage of the term?
The history of the usage of the term, leaving aside the places in Scripture, but this place in Scripture where it's used metaphorically, I'm not aware of any other uses of it metaphorically except for this one. But, yeah. I'm also not aware of any extra biblical usage of your cross. as a metaphor. But that doesn't make me assume that take up your cross means we should be literally carrying around large crosses.
Turretinfan, are you aware of John Pickering's work? It's called A Comprehensive Lexicon of the Greek Language. Are you aware that in this passage he traces the usage of this term pretty much every time it's used in ancient history leading up to the scriptural usage, and never ever once categorizes a metaphorical usage of this term? And the reason I ask you I'm aware that William Webster quoted from his lexicon one time, which is why I am asking if you are aware of the usage here, the commentary.
I'm not. I've heard the assertion many times from many people, and I think it's a misleading assertion because the fact that something has no other examples of being metaphorically used doesn't suggest that the word itself has any incapability of being used in a metaphor. Just as I pointed out, take up your cross, I'm not aware of any extra biblical usage of that in a metaphorical way, but that doesn't prevent the biblical authors from using it in a metaphorical way.
Okay.
I could provide other examples as well.
Right, definitely. Yeah, I believe my time is up. It goes so fast.
Yeah. So we have Turretinfan, your cross-exam of William.
Yes, thanks. That actually segues nicely into my next point, which is Jesus says, "I am the true vine." Now, if we were to find that no other ancient Greek author used the vine as a metaphor, would that mean that that we should understand this as Jesus saying he's truly a grapevine or an olive vine or some other kind of plant?
Well, I actually think that's a fantastic question, and I think it goes right to the heart of the issue. In comparison to the usage of what I would call the Eucharistic passages, Matthew 26, Luke 22, Mark and John, Corinthians, I think the difference is we have the early church fathers looking upon these passages, commenting on them, showing us how the early church viewed them, interpreting them for us, showing us how they've been viewed from basically the beginning of the biblical era. And we can see the stark, I'd say, drastic difference in how we see the usage of each and every passage of, whenever fruit of the vine is used or Christ is a true vine. And we compare that to the usage of these Eucharistic passages. And I guess perhaps your position would hold water if perhaps there was some commentary that would validate that. But I think as opposed to the Eucharistic passages, which we can see how the early church is viewing them, it's completely different to the passages where Christ says he is a true vine and passages where we read of the fruit of the vine and what have you.
So my question was, if there is no other ancient Greek usage of vine as a metaphor, does that mean that we should therefore take this?
So your question is a hypothetical one.
Because under the assumption we can't find some other Greek usage outside of Scripture for this, then should we take it? Under that assumption, should we then take this literally?
When Christ says that he is the true vine, I think that what we would have to do is we'd have to examine how the early church would interpret it. We'd have to examine the Greek terminology. And, with all due respect, it sounds ridiculous, of course. I mean, if I was asserting it would sound, and I know you're just making a hypothetical example here, but I think if there was nothing else pointing to that, I mean, it would be illogical to ever reach that conclusion. But, thank God that we've got the early fathers and we have the scriptural evidence that shows otherwise.
Do you think we really needed the church fathers to explain to us that when Jesus says, "I'm a door," that he's a door, for us to be able to figure out that's a metaphor? Do you think we really need those fathers, or we could figure it out without them?
No, I would believe that it's common sense that Christ is not an actual door because, again, I would argue, yes, I do think we need the early church fathers. I think they're very, very important because when we look at the early church fathers, we never see them fostering an adoration of doors. But we do see them not just adoring the elements after they've been consecrated, but worshiping them because they've been transformed.
The fact that we are able to figure out metaphor without having to have the fathers there. I'm not saying that the fathers aren't useful, but the fact that we can figure out metaphors without having to have the fathers at least opens the possibility that if this is a metaphor, then we may be able to figure that out without the assistance of the fathers. Is that something you could agree with, or you find fault with that? There's some categories of metaphors that would be too hard to figure out, and
I think you bring up a really, really good point, because as far as I know, I did extensive studying in the Greek word trogon for chew and masticate, and as far as I did, as far as I could pull up, I didn't pull up a whole lot of usages of the term. So if you try and look into the early church fathers, whereas they would interpret these passages in a manner in which I would call Catholic/Orthodox, you can look at the plain meaning of the text, and we can tell if something is being used in a metaphorical manner or not. At times, of course, we don't need somebody standing there and telling us, this is what it means. But it's a great help when we look into the early Christian church and we see just what was taught and believed from the very beginning.